My fiancé cheated on me with my own mother just days before our wedding, but what I did shocked everyone. I should have known something was wrong when Mom insisted on helping with every wedding detail. She'd never shown interest in my life before. Growing up, she'd been the type of mother who forgot my birthday, but remembered every slight against her. She blamed me for Dad leaving when I was 8, claimed I was too needy, too loud, too much. She'd lock herself in her room for days after arguments, leaving me to fend for myself. I learned to make my own meals by age 10 and forged her signature on school forms by 12. The worst part wasn't the neglect. It was the psychological warfare. She'd tell me I was the reason our family fell apart, that Dad left because he couldn't stand having such a difficult child. She'd compare me to other kids constantly, pointing out how much prettier, smarter, or more talented they were. When I brought home good grades, she'd find flaws. When I made friends, she'd find reasons they were bad influences. When I showed interest in art or music, she'd dismiss it as impractical dreaming. She had this way of making me feel invisible and hypervisible at the same time. If I was quiet, she'd accuse me of being sullen and ungrateful. If I tried to engage with her, she'd tell me I was attention-seeking and exhausting. There was no winning with her, no way to be the daughter she wanted because she didn't want a daughter at all. By high school, I'd learned to be invisible. I kept my grades up, stayed out of trouble, and counted the days until I could escape to college. Mom seemed relieved when I left, finally free of the burden of pretending to care about my existence. She didn't call during my freshman year, didn't visit, didn't even send a care package or birthday card. When I came home for Christmas break, she'd redecorated my room into a home office. All my childhood belongings were boxed up in the garage, including photos of us together and artwork I'd made for her over the years. She said she needed the space for her new real estate business and couldn't understand why I was upset about sleeping on the couch. But suddenly, 3 months before my wedding, she transformed into the perfect mother of the bride. She was picking flowers, tasting cakes, scheduling dress fittings, and offering to pay for upgrades I couldn't afford. She insisted on bonding activities like mother-daughter spa days and shopping trips. She even suggested we take a girls' trip to Vegas before the wedding, claiming she wanted to make up for lost time. The transformation was so complete that people who knew our history couldn't believe it. My college friends were amazed when Mom started calling me daily and posting photos of us together on social media. She'd caption them with things like, "My beautiful daughter," and "I'm so proud of the woman she's become." Comments poured in from relatives I hadn't heard from in years, congratulating us on finally healing our relationship. I thought she'd finally decided to be the mother I'd always wanted. Maybe losing Dad had taught her to value what remained of our family. Maybe seeing me happy with Derek had shown her that I wasn't the burden she'd always believed me to be. Maybe she'd finally grown up and realized that pushing away your only child wasn't worth the loneliness. Derek had been my salvation in college. After years of walking on eggshells around Mom, he made me feel worthy of love. He'd drive 4 hours just to bring me soup when I was sick. He remembered every story I told him about my childhood trauma and promised our future would be different. He held me during panic attacks and convinced me to try therapy. When he proposed after graduation with my grandmother's ring that Mom had supposedly lost years ago, I thought I'd finally escape the toxicity of my childhood. Derek was everything Mom had told me I'd never deserve. Handsome, successful, patient with my anxiety and trust issues. He never raised his voice, never made me feel stupid, never criticized my appearance or dreams. When Mom started warming up to him during our engagement, I thought maybe she was finally seeing my worth through his eyes. He had this way of making me feel protected and valued that I'd never experienced before. When I'd have nightmares about my childhood, he'd hold me until I stopped shaking. When I'd spiral into self-doubt, he'd remind me of all my accomplishments. When I'd worry that I wasn't good enough for him, he'd show me the engagement ring and promise that I was everything he'd ever wanted. Looking back, I should have questioned how he afforded that ring on his entry-level salary. I should have wondered why Mom suddenly found it in her jewelry box right before our engagement, but I was so grateful for their apparent reconciliation that I ignored the red flags waving frantically in front of my face. The wedding planning brought out a side of Mom I'd never seen. She was attentive, affectionate, almost possessive of her role in our big day. She insisted on being involved in every decision, from the centerpieces to the music selection. She even offered to pay for the honeymoon, claiming she'd been saving money for years specifically for my wedding. Derek encouraged this newfound generosity, telling me how lucky I was to finally have Mom's support. She started calling me pet names she'd never used before. Sweetheart, darling, my beautiful daughter. She'd tear up during dress fittings, claiming she was overwhelmed with pride. She posted photos of us on social media with captions about how blessed she was to have such an amazing daughter. Friends who'd known us for years were shocked by the transformation. The attention from Mom was intoxicating after years of emotional starvation. When she'd compliment my choices or ask my opinion about wedding details, I felt like I was finally getting the maternal approval I'd craved my entire life. When she'd hug me and tell me she loved me, I'd almost cry from relief. I thought we were building the relationship I'd always dreamed of. She started sharing stories about her own wedding to Dad, things she'd never told me before. How nervous she'd been walking down the aisle, how beautiful she'd felt in her dress, how excited she'd been to start a family. It made me feel like she finally understood what this day meant to me, like she was finally ready to be the mother I needed. The wedding was 3 days away when I realized I'd forgotten my backup mascara at Mom's house. I'd been staying at my apartment to avoid her sudden clingy behavior. She'd started calling me multiple times daily, wanting to discuss last-minute details that had already been finalized. Her intensity was overwhelming after years of indifference. She'd show up at my work unannounced with coffee and pastries, wanting to chat about wedding plans. She'd text me constantly with Pinterest boards and magazine clippings. The night before I went to get my mascara, she'd called me crying because she was so overwhelmed with emotion about the wedding. She said she couldn't believe her baby was getting married, that she was so proud of the woman I'd become, that she wished her own mother had lived to see this day. It was the most emotional conversation we'd ever had. I went to bed feeling closer to her than I'd felt since childhood. I had my own key from high school, so I let myself in quietly around midnight, not wanting to wake her and trigger another lengthy conversation about flower arrangements or seating charts. I figured I'd grab the mascara from my old bathroom and leave her a sweet note thanking her for all her help with the wedding. That's when I heard the voices upstairs. At first, I thought she was watching a late-night movie. Mom had always been a night owl, claiming she couldn't sleep in the house where Dad used to live. She said the memories kept her awake, though she'd never specified whether they were good or bad memories. Sometimes I'd hear her pacing at night when I visited, and I'd assumed she was still processing the divorce after all these years. Then I heard a man's laugh, a familiar laugh that made my stomach drop to my feet, the same laugh that had comforted me through panic attacks and celebrated my small victories. The laugh I'd fallen asleep to countless times during our 4 years together. The laugh I'd been looking forward to hearing for the rest of my life. I crept up the stairs, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they'd hear it. Every step felt like walking toward my own execution. The old wooden steps creaked under my weight, each sound amplified in the silence. I could hear them more clearly now, talking in low, intimate voices that suggested this wasn't their first time together. Mom's bedroom door was cracked open just enough. Through the gap, I saw them tangled in her sheets. My fiancé of 4 years, my mother of 26 years, moving together like they'd choreographed this betrayal 1,000 times before. Derek's hands in her hair, her legs wrapped around his waist, both of them completely lost in each other. The sight should have destroyed me, but what came next was worse than any physical betrayal could have been. The worst part wasn't catching them in the act. It was hearing what they said after. Mom traced lazy circles on his chest and whispered, "She's so naive. She actually thinks you love her. Always has been desperate for affection. Makes her easy to manipulate. Just like when she was little, begging me to love her, willing to do anything for the smallest scrap of attention." Derek laughed, the same laugh I'd fallen in love with. "The money's good, though. Her trust fund will set us up nicely once we're married. I never have to work another dead-end job again. $2 million just for putting up with her neediness for a few years. Best return on investment I've ever made." Trust fund? I didn't have a trust fund. We'd been eating ramen for years while saving for this wedding. I'd worked double shifts at the diner to afford my dress. Derek complained constantly about his student loans and entry-level marketing salary. He'd made me feel guilty for wanting anything beyond basic necessities, claiming we needed to be practical about our finances. Mom sat up, her voice casual like they were discussing weekend plans. "Once we're married and she has that hiking accident we planned, everything goes to me as her only family. Then we can be together openly without pretending anymore. I'm tired of acting like the supportive mother. Do you know how exhausting it is to pretend I care about centerpieces and dress fittings? I've had to bite my tongue so many times to keep from telling her what I really think of her choices." My blood turned to ice. They weren't just cheating. They were planning to murder me. Derek's voice was thoughtful, calculating. "The trail you picked is perfect. Cascade Falls has that cliff overlook where people take photos. One little push when she's posing and it'll look like she slipped. You'll be the grieving mother. I'll be the devastated widower who lost his soulmate on our honeymoon. The insurance alone will cover our debts, and then there's the trust fund. We can travel the world, buy that house in Tuscany you've always wanted." Mom laughed, a sound I'd never heard from her before, cold and satisfied. "I've been planning this since you first brought her home 3 years ago. Did you see how desperate she was for my approval? How grateful she got when I finally started acting interested? Pathetic. She'll do anything to please me now. She'd probably jump off that cliff herself if I asked her to, just to make me happy." The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Every time Derek had pushed for us to go hiking together, every suggestion about scenic photo spots, every conversation about how I should reconnect with Mom after years of distance. He'd been setting up my murder while I planned our future. They discussed how they'd met. Derek had researched my family after our second date, discovered Mom's financial situation, and tracked her down at her real estate office. He'd seduced her with promises of wealth and freedom, convinced her that I was the only obstacle to their happiness together. Mom had been lonely and bitter after years of failed relationships. Easy prey for a charming younger man who told her she deserved better than being tied down by an ungrateful daughter. Derek stretched and checked his phone. The insurance policy finally went through. $500,000 if she dies in an accident within the first year of marriage, plus whatever's left in that trust fund after your mother pays us back for all those years of expenses. We'll be set for life. My mother pays us back? What expenses? Mom's voice turned bitter. Every penny I've spent raising that ungrateful brat. Food, clothes, housing, medical bills. She owes me for ruining my life. If I hadn't gotten pregnant, I could have married Richard Thompson instead of her worthless father. Richard owns half the city now. I could have been somebody instead of stuck with a whining child who never appreciated anything I did for her. Derek nodded sympathetically. "She doesn't deserve you. Never has. You're beautiful, intelligent, accomplished. You should have had the life you wanted instead of being trapped by an accident that should have been prevented." Should have been prevented. They were talking about my birth like it was a mistake that could have been avoided. Like I was a tumor that had grown in Mom's perfect life, something that should have been removed before it could cause damage. They discussed logistics like they were planning a vacation, which trail would be least crowded, what time of day would provide the best cover, how to position themselves so no other hikers would witness the push, how long to wait before calling for help, what their statements to police would be. Mom had researched local rescue response times. Derek had practiced his grief reactions in the mirror. They'd even chosen my burial outfit, something simple that wouldn't suggest I'd been planning to leave Derek for another man. They'd written fake diary entries in my handwriting, documenting fictional depression and suicidal thoughts that would support their narrative if anyone questioned the accident. The most chilling part was how clinical they were about it. No emotion, no hesitation, just cold calculation about the most efficient way to end my life. Mom discussed my death the same way she'd talk about getting rid of old furniture. Derek planned my murder with the same attention to detail he'd used planning our wedding. They talked about the future they'd have together, the trips they'd take with my money, the house they'd buy, the story they'd tell about how grief brought them together, how finding love in tragedy had helped them heal. They'd even planned when to get married, calculating the appropriate mourning period before their relationship could become public. I backed away from the door, my legs shaking so badly I could barely stand. They thought I was stupid, naive, easy to manipulate and dispose of. For 4 years, I'd planned a future with a man who saw me as a stepping stone to wealth I didn't even know existed. And my own mother, the woman who gave birth to me, was helping him plan my death while pretending to finally love me. Every loving gesture from the past 3 months had been a lie. Every hug, every compliment, every moment of apparent maternal pride had been an act designed to make me trust her enough to walk into my own murder. The wedding planning hadn't been about celebrating my happiness. It had been about setting up the perfect cover story for my death. That night, I didn't confront them. Instead, I started planning something that would destroy both their lives forever. I spent the next 2 days acting like the blushing bride they expected to murder. I confirmed vendors, finalized seating charts, and smiled until my face hurt. But behind their backs, I was setting up the most elaborate revenge either of them could imagine. Every loving gesture from Derek made my skin crawl. Every proud smile from Mom felt like a knife twisting deeper. When she hugged me and called me her precious daughter, I wanted to vomit. The hardest part was pretending nothing had changed. When Derek would kiss me goodnight, I had to fight the urge to push him away. When Mom would tear up talking about how beautiful I'd look walking down the aisle, I had to resist the urge to scream that I knew she was planning my funeral, not my wedding. First, I called Dad. We hadn't spoken in years because Mom had convinced me he'd abandoned us for his secretary. She'd shown me fake evidence of his affair, forged emails and photos that looked authentic to my teenage eyes. She'd told me he'd called me names, said he regretted having a daughter, wanted nothing to do with my future. When I tracked down his number and called him, Dad broke down crying when he heard my voice. He'd been sending child support for years, which Mom claimed she never received. He'd tried to maintain contact, but Mom intercepted his letters and phone calls. She'd convinced the court that any contact would traumatize me further, given my supposed emotional instability. She'd even faked a doctor's report claiming I had severe anxiety triggered by thoughts of Dad. Your grandmother left you everything when she died, he explained through tears. A trust fund worth over $2 million that was supposed to support your education and future. Your mother has been the trustee, but it transfers to your spouse when you marry or to you directly at age 30. She's been living off the interest for 18 years while telling you we were broke. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All those years of wearing secondhand clothes while Mom bought designer handbags. All those nights of eating cereal for dinner while she went out to expensive restaurants. All those times I'd felt guilty for needing school supplies or wanting to participate in activities because we couldn't afford them. She'd had access to more money than most people see in a lifetime, and she'd let me believe we were struggling. Dad was horrified when I told him about the murder plot. He'd suspected Mom was unstable after their divorce, but this level of evil shocked him. She'd been manipulative and controlling during their marriage, but he'd never imagined she was capable of planning murder. He agreed to help me gather evidence and testify if needed. He also revealed that Mom had been institutionalized briefly when I was 3 for what doctors called a psychotic break. She'd become obsessed with the idea that I was cursed, that my presence was destroying her life. She'd tried to give me away to strangers, claiming she was saving me from myself. Dad had fought for custody then, but Mom's family had money and connections. She'd convinced the court she was better after therapy, but Dad said she'd never really recovered. The institutionalization explained so much about my early childhood. The way Mom would stare at me sometimes with pure hatred. The way she'd flinch when I tried to hug her. The way she'd talk to me like I was an unwelcome guest in her house instead of her daughter. She'd been fighting the urge to hurt me for most of my life. Next, I installed recording apps on my phone and started documenting everything. I recorded Mom and Derek discussing the hiking trip logistics. I photographed Derek's laptop when he left it open, showing his research on how to make deaths look accidental. I found the life insurance policy he'd taken out on me without my knowledge, forging my signature on documents he'd convinced me were wedding-related paperwork. I discovered Mom's secret bank account where she'd been depositing the trust fund interest for years. She'd been living like a queen while I worked minimum wage jobs and ate generic cereal. She'd taken expensive vacations while I couldn't afford textbooks. She'd redecorated her house multiple times while I wore secondhand clothes. The account statements showed deposits going back to my childhood, hundreds of thousands of dollars that should have been used for my care and education. The evidence was overwhelming. Chat logs between them going back 3 years, starting just months after Derek and I became serious. Photos Derek had taken of potential murder locations during our supposed romantic hikes. Mom's detailed financial records showing exactly how much she'd stolen from my inheritance. Even recordings of them practicing their grief reactions for when I died. Derek had files on his laptop labeled with code names. Project Freedom was their murder plan. Golden Goose was the trust fund information. Widow's Walk was his research on how to play the grieving husband. He'd studied other cases where spouses had died in hiking accidents, learning from what worked and what raised suspicion. The most chilling discovery was Mom's journal, hidden in her bedroom safe. Years of entries detailing her resentment toward me, her regret about not terminating the pregnancy, her fantasies about what her life would have been like without me. She'd written detailed plans for getting rid of me that dated back to my childhood. The only thing that had stopped her was fear of getting caught. One entry from when I was 12 read, "She looked at me today with those big eyes, asking if I loved her. I wanted to tell her the truth, that she ruined everything, that every day with her is torture, that I dream about her disappearing. But I smiled and said yes, because that's what mothers are supposed to do. Someday, I'll find a way to be free of her." Another entry from my high school graduation said, "Watching her walk across that stage, I felt nothing but relief. Soon she'll be gone and I can finally live my life. If only there was a way to make sure she never comes back." But Derek had given her the perfect opportunity, a way to eliminate me that would look natural and provide them both with financial security and freedom. Her final entry before the wedding was almost giddy with anticipation. "Soon I'll be free. Soon I'll have everything I've wanted. Soon that mistake I made 26 years ago will finally be corrected." I also found correspondence between Mom and several private investigators she'd hired over the years. She'd been tracking my movements, monitoring my relationships, gathering information about my financial situation. When Derek came along, she'd seen her opportunity and pounced. The night before the wedding, Derek took me to dinner at our favorite restaurant. He held my hands across the table and told me how much he loved me, how excited he was to start our life together, how grateful he was that Mom had finally accepted him into the family. He talked about our future children, the house we'd buy, the trips we'd take with my trust fund money. The performance was flawless. If I hadn't heard him planning my murder, I would have believed every word. He gazed into my eyes with apparent adoration, spoke about our future with convincing enthusiasm, even teared up when talking about how much our love meant to him. He'd even brought a gift, a locket with our photo inside, which he fastened around my neck with gentle kisses. I realized later it was meant to be my memorial jewelry, something for him to wear during interviews about his tragic loss. He'd probably practiced reaching for it during fake emotional moments. I smiled and told him I loved him too, knowing it would be the last lie I ever told him. The morning of the wedding, I put on my dress, did my makeup, and walked down that aisle like nothing had changed. 300 guests watched as I approached the altar where Derek waited, probably calculating how many months he'd have to grieve before he could openly be with Mom. The ceremony was beautiful. The flowers Mom had chosen were perfect. The music she'd selected was exactly what I would have wanted. Even planning my murder, she'd managed to create the wedding of my dreams. Perhaps that was her final act of cruelty, making sure my last day alive would be everything I'd ever wanted. As I walked down the aisle, I looked at the faces of our guests, Derek's family, proud and emotional, my college friends, dabbing at their eyes with tissues. Even some of Mom's relatives I barely knew, smiling warmly as they watched what they thought was a happy ending to my troubled relationship with Mom. None of them knew they were attending my funeral rehearsal, but when the priest asked if anyone objected to this union, I turned to face the crowd and said the words that would expose their evil forever. "I object," I announced, my voice carrying across the silent church, "because this man and my mother have been planning to murder me for my inheritance." The gasps from the guests were audible. Children started crying. Derek's face went white as fresh snow. His mother clutched her chest like she was having a heart attack. His father stood up halfway, confusion and horror warring on his face. Mom started to stand up from the front row, her mouth opening to protest. But I wasn't finished. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the church sound system that Derek had helped me test the week before. The irony wasn't lost on me that he'd assisted in setting up the equipment that would expose his crimes. Every word of their conversation about the accident, the trust fund, and their affair echoed through the sacred space. Their voices discussing my death like a business transaction, Mom's laughter at my naivety, Derek's calculations about insurance payouts, their casual cruelty as they planned to end my life. As the recording played, I watched the faces in the crowd transform from confusion to horror to rage. Derek's mother fainted. His father started toward the altar like he wanted to strangle his son with his bare hands. My bridesmaids stood frozen, bouquets dropping from their hands. The priest stepped back from the altar, crossing himself repeatedly. The choir director stopped the music and stared in shock. Even the wedding photographer kept taking pictures, probably realizing this would be the most dramatic wedding he'd ever document. When the recording ended, the silence that followed was deafening. Derek lunged toward me, screaming that I was lying, that I was crazy, just like my mother. But Dad and my uncle were already moving down the aisle. They tackled him to the ground as he thrashed and shouted about frame jobs and manipulated recordings. His desperation was almost funny after hearing him plan my death so calmly. Derek's father reached us and started kicking his son while he was down, screaming about raising a monster. It took 3 men to pull him away as he sobbed about the shame Derek had brought on their family. Mom tried to run toward the back exit, but I'd arranged for that too. The church doors had been locked from the outside. Security guards I'd hired stood at every exit. Mom pounded on the doors, screaming about false accusations and demanding to be let out. She'd transformed back into the woman I remembered from childhood, angry, entitled, blaming everyone but herself. When she realized she was trapped, Mom turned back to the crowd and tried to play the victim. She claimed Derek had manipulated her, threatened her, forced her to participate in discussions she thought were fantasies. But the evidence spoke for itself. Her own words on the recording, her journal entries, her financial records. The police arrived exactly on schedule. I'd called them that morning and arranged for them to wait outside until my signal. Detective Rodriguez, who I'd met with twice that week, entered with a warrant for their arrests. They took Derek and Mom into custody on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and embezzlement. As they led Mom away in handcuffs, she looked back at me with pure hatred blazing in her eyes. "This is all your fault," she hissed. "I should have gotten rid of you years ago like I wanted to. You've been nothing but a burden since the day you were born. I wish I'd never had you. You ruined my life, and now you're trying to ruin it again." Even facing prison, she couldn't take responsibility for her choices. The mask had finally slipped completely. This was the woman who'd raised me, who'd made me believe I was worthless and unlovable. At least now everyone could see her true nature. Derek tried a different approach as they read him his rights. "Baby, please, this is all a misunderstanding. I love you. Your mother manipulated me. She threatened to hurt you if I didn't go along with her plan. I was trying to protect you. I would never actually hurt you. You have to believe me." But I'd heard him laugh about my naivety. I'd seen his research on murder methods. I'd found the insurance policy with his signature requesting the maximum payout for accidental death. His lies couldn't undo the truth I'd recorded. The aftermath was chaos. Guests fled the church in shock and horror. The media arrived within hours, drawn by reports of a wedding day murder plot. The story went viral immediately. Videos of my announcement and Mom and Derek being arrested spread across social media faster than wildfire. The trial lasted 8 months and became a media sensation. The evidence was overwhelming, but their lawyers tried every angle. They claimed I'd fabricated the recordings using voice synthesis technology. They suggested I was mentally unstable from childhood trauma and had created an elaborate delusion. They argued that discussing hypothetical scenarios wasn't the same as planning actual murder. Derek's defense team painted him as a victim of Mom's manipulation. They claimed she'd seduced him and threatened his life if he didn't cooperate. They brought in psychiatrists who testified about Mom's history of mental illness and her ability to control others through psychological warfare. They argued that Derek was just a young man who'd fallen under the spell of an older, more experienced manipulator. Mom's lawyers took a different approach. They argued that she was the victim of Derek's manipulation, that he'd convinced her to participate in discussions she thought were fantasies. They claimed she'd been trying to protect me by going along with his plans while secretly planning to warn me. They painted her as a loving mother who'd been corrupted by a charming sociopath. But the forensic evidence was irrefutable. The insurance policies, the financial records, the deleted browser history showing research on hiking accidents, the detailed timeline they'd created for my death, even love letters between them discussing their future together after I was gone. The most damning evidence was Mom's journal, her own handwriting describing years of resentment and fantasies about my death, her detailed financial calculations showing how much money she'd save without me, her excitement about finally being free to live the life she wanted. During the trial, more victims came forward. Derek had attempted similar schemes with previous girlfriends, though none had trust funds worth killing for. He'd cultivated relationships with vulnerable women, isolated them from their families, then disappeared when he realized they had no money worth stealing. One woman testified that he'd researched her family's finances and suddenly lost interest when he learned her parents were in debt. Mom's history was even darker. Childhood friends testified about her narcissistic behavior and violent outbursts. Former colleagues described her obsession with money and status. Even her own sister admitted that Mom had always been jealous of others' happiness and determined to destroy anything she couldn't have for herself. The sister revealed that Mom had tried to manipulate inheritance distributions when their own mother died, attempting to convince relatives that she deserved a larger share because she'd been caring for a child. She'd lied about my needs and expenses, claiming I required expensive medical care that didn't exist. Derek got 30 years for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and attempted theft. Mom got 25 years and was ordered to pay back every penny she'd stolen from my inheritance, plus interest and penalties totaling over $4 million. During her sentencing, Mom stood up and addressed the court one final time. "I gave that girl everything," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "I sacrificed my youth, my dreams, my body to raise her. She owes me compensation for the life I lost. If she'd just died quietly like she was supposed to, none of this would have happened. I would have been a good mother if she hadn't been such a difficult child. Some children are just born wrong, and she was one of them." The judge's face was stone cold as he denied her request for a reduced sentence. He called her one of the most dangerous individuals he'd encountered in 30 years on the bench, noting that she showed no remorse and continued to blame her victim even after being caught planning murder. My wedding dress now hangs in my closet as a reminder that sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones planning to destroy you. But it also reminds me that I'm stronger than they thought I was, that their opinion of me as weak and naive was their fatal mistake. I used the trust fund money to start a foundation for children who've been abused by their parents. Every year, on what would have been my anniversary, I host a gala to raise awareness about family violence and financial abuse. The foundation has helped over 8,000 children escape dangerous situations. Their thank you letters fill an entire wall in my office. The foundation's programs include safe houses for children fleeing abusive homes, legal aid for custody battles, therapy services for trauma recovery, and financial education to prevent future exploitation. We've expanded to 18 states and helped pass legislation requiring better oversight of trust fund management. We also operate a 24-hour hotline for children who suspect their parents are stealing from them or planning to harm them. The calls range from teenagers who've discovered empty college funds to adult children who've learned their elderly parents have been manipulated by caregivers. Each case requires careful investigation and often involves law enforcement. Derek writes me from prison sometimes, claiming he really did love me and was manipulated by Mom. He insists that if I just talked to him about the trust fund, none of this would have happened. He blames Mom for corrupting his pure intentions. His letters alternate between begging for forgiveness and threatening revenge when he gets out. I burn them all unread now, but I keep copies for law enforcement in case he escalates to direct threats. Mom was denied parole 4 times. She'll serve her full sentence. During her last parole hearing, she told the board that she still believed killing me would have been justified compensation for raising an unwanted child. She showed no remorse and blamed me for destroying her life by refusing to die quietly. They denied her unanimously and noted that she remained a danger to society. The parole board's report described her as completely lacking in empathy and unable to accept responsibility for her actions. They recommended she serve her full sentence without possibility of early release, noting that she continued to express regret only for being caught, not for planning murder. The media coverage was intense for months. Nancy Grace did a week-long special called Betrayed at the Altar. True crime podcasts dissected every detail of the case. Netflix made a documentary called The Wedding Day Murders that won an Emmy. Investigation Discovery created a 2-hour special featuring interviews with witnesses and law enforcement. I declined most interview requests, but I did appear on a few shows to promote the foundation and encourage other abuse survivors to speak up. The attention was overwhelming, but it helped spread awareness about financial abuse and family violence. Donations poured in from around the world, allowing us to expand our programs faster than we'd ever imagined. The attention brought both support and criticism. Some people accused me of being too dramatic, of overreacting to what they saw as empty threats. Others suggested I should have handled it privately instead of destroying the lives of two people who might have been all talk. But the evidence spoke for itself. They'd planned every detail of my murder. Without intervention, I'd be dead. The criticism hurt, but it also taught me that some people would rather maintain the illusion of family harmony than confront uncomfortable truths about abuse. They couldn't imagine parents who genuinely wanted their children dead, so they dismissed the evidence as exaggeration or misunderstanding. Sometimes people ask if I ever plan to remarry. The answer is yes, but not until I'm sure I can trust my own judgment again. I'm in therapy twice a week, learning to recognize manipulation and set boundaries. My therapist says it's remarkable that I survived their psychological warfare as well as I did. Many people in similar situations don't recognize the danger until it's too late. I've been dating someone for the past 2 years. His name is James, and he's a social worker who specializes in family trauma. He knows my story and understands why I need to take things slowly. He's patient with my trust issues and supportive of my foundation work. Most importantly, he has his own money and career, so I know he's not after my inheritance. James was actually recommended by my therapist, who thought we'd be compatible based on our shared commitment to helping abuse survivors. Our first date was at a volunteer event for the foundation, and I was impressed by his genuine compassion for the children we serve. He treats them with dignity and respect, never talking down to them or dismissing their fears. Dad and I have rebuilt our relationship completely. He admits he should have fought harder for custody when I was young, but he was afraid of Mom's threats to disappear with me. She'd convinced him that any contact would traumatize me further. We have dinner every Sunday now, and he walks me through family photos I'd never seen, telling me stories about relatives Mom claimed were dead or uninterested in our lives. Through Dad, I learned that my entire extended family had been trying to maintain contact with me for years. Aunts and uncles had sent birthday cards that Mom intercepted. Cousins had invited me to graduations and weddings that I never knew about. Grandparents on Dad's side had set up college funds that Mom convinced them to close, claiming I wasn't academically inclined. The lies ran so deep that rebuilding these relationships has taken years. Some relatives were initially suspicious of me, having been told by Mom that I hated them and wanted nothing to do with the family. Others were hurt that I'd supposedly ignored their attempts to reach out. It took time and patience to untangle decades of Mom's manipulation. Grandmother's ring, it turns out, had never been lost. Mom had been wearing it for years, claiming it was a gift from a friend. When Dad saw it on Derek's proposal video, he knew immediately what had happened. That was another piece of evidence that helped convict them. The ring had been in our family for 4 generations, passed down from mother to daughter. Grandmother had specifically requested that it go to me when I got married, along with the trust fund she'd established for my future. Mom had violated both wishes, stealing my inheritance and my family heirloom to further her own agenda. The extended family rallied around me after the trial. Aunts and uncles I'd never met came forward with stories about Mom's behavior over the years. They'd suspected she was abusing me, but had been afraid to intervene because of her threats and manipulation. Many of them had tried to maintain contact with me as a child, but Mom had blocked their efforts with lies about restraining orders and custody agreements. My Aunt Sarah revealed that she'd called Child Protective Services twice when I was young, concerned about my appearance at family gatherings. I'd always seemed withdrawn and fearful, wearing long sleeves even in summer to hide bruises. But Mom had convinced the social workers that I was clumsy and accident-prone, and that the family was targeting her out of jealousy over her successful real estate career. I learned that Grandmother had specifically structured the trust fund to protect me from Mom. She'd suspected her daughter was unstable and had included provisions requiring multiple trustees to approve large withdrawals. Mom had found ways around these safeguards by forging documents and bribing bank officials, but Grandmother had tried to protect me even after death. The bank investigation that followed my case revealed a network of corruption involving several employees who'd helped Mom access funds illegally. 3 people were fired and faced criminal charges for their role in the embezzlement. The bank ultimately paid additional damages for their failure to protect my inheritance. The hiking trail they'd chosen for my murder has become a place of healing for me. I lead monthly walks there with my therapy support group, not because I'm trying to prove anything, but because I refuse to let their evil steal any more of my life. At the top of that cliff where they'd planned to push me, I scattered wildflower seeds. By the following spring, something beautiful had grown in the place where they'd planned to end my story. The trail now has a memorial bench dedicated to survivors of family violence. Hikers often stop to read the plaque and leave flowers. Park rangers tell me it's become an unofficial pilgrimage site for people who've escaped abusive situations. The bench includes a QR code that links to resources for abuse victims, funded by the foundation. Last year, I received a letter from a hiker who'd stopped at the memorial bench during a particularly dark period in her life. She'd been contemplating suicide after years of abuse from her husband, but reading about my story and the resources available gave her hope. She left her abusive marriage that week and is now thriving in a new city with her children. The foundation's latest project is a legal clinic that helps abuse survivors navigate financial fraud cases. Too many people discover, like I did, that their trusted family members have been stealing from them for years. We've recovered over $20 million for victims so far, money that was supposed to support their education, healthcare, and future security. We're also working on legislation requiring better psychological screening for trust fund trustees. Too many children are left vulnerable to exploitation by mentally ill or financially desperate relatives. The bill, nicknamed Emma's Law after me, has passed in 8 states and is being considered in 15 more. The law requires annual mental health evaluations for trustees managing funds over a certain amount, mandatory reporting of large withdrawals, and automatic transfers of control when beneficiaries reach adulthood. It also creates criminal penalties for trustees who misuse funds and establishes victim compensation programs. Derek's appeal was denied last month. He'll serve his full sentence. His family disowned him after the trial, horrified by what he'd planned to do. His mother sent me a letter apologizing for raising a monster and donating money to the foundation in his memory, as if he'd died instead of revealed his true nature. Derek's father started a support group for families of criminals, helping parents cope with the shame and guilt of discovering their children's true nature. He speaks publicly about missing the warning signs and encourages other parents to trust their instincts when something feels wrong about their children's behavior. The wedding venue became something of a tourist attraction after the trial. They now offer tours of the chapel where I exposed the murder plot, with proceeds going to domestic violence organizations. They still offer to let me use their space again someday at no charge, calling what I did the most courageous thing they'd ever witnessed. The venue has also implemented new security protocols after my experience. They now require background checks for all wedding parties, maintain locked exits during ceremonies when requested, and have trained staff to recognize signs of domestic violence or coercion. Derek's former coworkers have reached out over the years with stories about his behavior they dismissed as quirky at the time. He'd researched life insurance policies obsessively, asked inappropriate questions about their family finances, and shown unusual interest in their relationship problems. They realized after the trial that he'd been hunting for his next victim. His supervisor at the marketing firm revealed that Derek had been using company resources to research potential targets. He'd run background checks on coworkers' daughters and accessed databases that contained financial information about local families. The company fired him posthumously and implemented stronger cybersecurity measures. The insurance company that issued my policy has used the case in training materials about fraud detection. They've implemented new safeguards requiring face-to-face meetings for high-value policies, psychological evaluations for unusual circumstances, and mandatory waiting periods for policies taken out shortly before marriages. The company also created a whistleblower program that rewards people for reporting suspicious insurance applications. Several other murder plots have been uncovered through this program, saving lives and preventing fraud. The church where we were married has added security protocols for weddings after my experience. They now require background checks for all vendors, maintain the ability to lock exits during ceremonies, and have trained ushers to recognize signs of distress or coercion. Father Martinez, the priest who married us, still checks on me occasionally. He says my courage in that moment restored his faith in justice and divine intervention. He's incorporated lessons about recognizing abuse into his marriage counseling, helping other couples identify unhealthy dynamics before they escalate. I still wear grandmother's ring on my right hand, not as a symbol of engagement, but as a reminder that I come from a line of strong women who survive difficult circumstances. Mom may have stolen years of inheritance, but she couldn't steal the strength grandmother passed down to me. The ring has become something of a talisman for the children the foundation serves. When they see it, I tell them about grandmother's wisdom and strength, how she tried to protect me even after death. Many of them don't have positive family role models, so hearing about grandmother gives them hope that not all adults are dangerous. The Foundation's children's programs have expanded internationally. We now operate safe houses in 22 countries and have helped thousands of children escape abusive situations. Many of them have gone on to successful careers and healthy relationships, proof that the cycle of abuse can be broken with proper support and intervention. Our newest program focuses on educating children about financial abuse and helping them understand their rights regarding inheritance and trust funds. Too many young people don't realize they're entitled to money that relatives have been stealing from them for years. One of our success stories is Maria, who came to us at age 16 after discovering her stepfather had been stealing from her college fund. With our help, she recovered the money, graduated from medical school, and now runs a clinic in her hometown. She credits the foundation with saving not just her future, but her life. The therapy programs we offer have helped hundreds of children process trauma and build healthy relationships. Our therapists specialize in family betrayal cases, understanding the unique challenges faced by children whose parents were supposed to protect them, but instead became their greatest threat. As I write this, it's been 7 years since that horrific night when I discovered their plan. 7 years since I learned that the two people I trusted most in the world saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to wealth and happiness. 7 years since I realized that sometimes saving your own life means destroying the lives of people who were supposed to protect you. The trauma isn't gone. I still have nightmares sometimes, still struggle with trust issues, still feel a chill when I think about how close I came to dying. But I've learned that survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about building something meaningful from the wreckage of what others tried to destroy. I don't regret exposing them. I don't regret the public humiliation or the prison sentences or the financial ruin. They made their choices. They planned my death while I planned our future. They underestimated me at every turn. The girl they thought was naive and easy to manipulate is now a survivor who's helped thousands of others escape similar situations. The trust fund they wanted to steal has funded a movement that saved countless lives. The wedding they planned to be my last day alive became the first day of my real life. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building something beautiful from the ashes of what others tried to destroy. It's proving that their worst assumptions about you were wrong. It's living so well that their hatred becomes irrelevant. Mom will die in prison. Derek will spend the best years of his life behind bars. And I'll spend mine making sure no other child suffers what I suffered. No other person falls victim to the kind of betrayal that almost killed me. In the end, they lost everything while trying to take everything from me. I gained everything by refusing to let them win. The foundation recently opened its 10th office, this one in the city where I grew up. It feels fitting that the place where I learned to survive abuse is now helping other children do the same. We've saved over 12,000 children since that wedding day, and each one represents a future that abusers tried to destroy but couldn't. My story has been featured in psychology textbooks as a case study in family violence and financial abuse. Universities use it to train social workers and law enforcement officers about the warning signs they need to watch for. Medical schools include it in courses about recognizing abuse in patients. The ripple effects continue to spread. Every child we save grows up to protect their own children. Every family we help rebuild becomes stronger than before. Every abuser we expose faces consequences that might deter others from similar crimes. I'll never know how many people are alive today because I found the courage to expose Mom and Derek that day in the church. But I know the number is higher than just me. When you break a cycle of abuse, you save not just yourself, but generations of future victims. That's the real victory. Not that I survived their betrayal, but that I transformed it into something that gives life instead of taking it away. They tried to make me a victim, but I chose to become a protector instead. And every day that choice matters more than their hatred ever could.